Hey everybody.
Hey everybody, this is Paranormal Science Lab Live. I'm Lisa.
I'm John.
And we are very pleased to have as our guests tonight, Edwin Becker and Marcia Becker. Hi guys.
Hi.
How are you doing?
Doing pretty good.
We're doing pretty good.
Cold there.
I mean, compared to the rest of the world, you know, our weather is pretty nice. I got some friends on the East Coast that aren't so happy.
That's true, and they're getting a little bit more of what we had last week. And but for those of you listening, if you are not familiar with Ed and Marcia, they are some of my favorite people in the world and fellow Missourians now, transplanted from Chicago, and lots of interesting things to talk about. But I think, guys, let's start with what got you in this crazy world of the paranormal field. Can you recount what happened for when you knew you were in a haunted house?
Sure. I was a happy novelist. I write what I call novelized nonfiction. And I had this, it was actually my diary. And I enhanced it as years went by. It was actually started 30 years ago. And it passed around from family members, and they all told me to publish it once electronic publishing and self-publishing became acceptable. So I gave it to my daughter, and I said, Catherine Higdon, and I said, would you publish this book for me? And I put her name on the cover, and if you look at the book cover, it's really an awful book cover. It's my mock-up. I mean, I gave her this crappy mock-up, and I said, here, and it had her name on it. And well, my youngest never listens to me. I mean, she never does. My older daughter, all I got to do is a slight inflection in my voice, and she'll start shaking. My youngest daughter just laughs at me, and she quickly took the book, put my name back on the cover, and she published it. And by the time I found out, I mean, I was pissed. I really was. And by the time I found out, it was #1 on new releases in Amazon. And I thought, well, wait a second, this ain't so bad, you know. But I did not want to go out into the paranormal world. I mean, Marcia can tell you, we were just humiliated in our youth by people telling us we're crazy, get our heads examined, our church abandoned us. And I had no idea, and this is God's truth. I didn't watch cable. I'm 68 years old. I didn't know about these programs that are on TV. I didn't know about EMFs or EMPs or whatever the hell they are. I knew nothing, and I did not know there was such a big, warm, welcoming paranormal community. So the first time I stuck my head out was actually on paranormal. My book went to #1 in London, in England, UK, or general, and it bumped their beloved Gordon Smith off his bench, and they said, who the hell is this American? Well, Paranormal Witness is located in London, so they came looking for me, and that was actually the first time I ever said anything public as far as a story, and it was very emotional. They had to stop the camera for both Marcia and I a number of times. And the one thing about talking to you guys and talking on radio, it's very much like therapy. The more you tell the story, the easier it becomes to tell. But there still is a lot of emotion that went along with what we experienced.
And I can say that I saw that we were at a Paracon last year together, and the television footage of the exorcism part of it was played, and I could tell that it really took you back there, Ed.
That was the only time I actually ever watched it.
Oh, really?
The whole thing. I will not watch the whole thing because you get, call it PTSD or whatever. When I watched it, especially the beginning, I can smell the room, I can feel the air, and it just gives me real bad feelings. So I don't even like watching that.
Well, Ed, give us just a second here. I think we're gonna play the first voiceover of yours, and then let's talk about how you got into that house and what happened.
Sure.
Okay.
Whatever you'd like. I'm author Edwin F. Becker. In 1971, there was a Chicago haunting so horrific that it was the first ever paranormal event televised by NBC, and a glimpse of a true exorcism. My book, True Haunting, tells the story. It is one that nearly destroyed my life and did destroy the lives of others. True Haunting is available at Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, or you can visit me at EdwinBecker.com. I'm author Edwin F. Becker.
Okay, and I've read True Haunting, and I think one of the beginning really, I think has stuck with me so much since I've read it, is your first visit to the house that you ended up buying, and the tenant that you encountered. Can you tell us what your experience was there, what you were thinking?
As a young man, I'm walking into this dilapidated building, and the real estate man was experienced. And as a youth, I didn't ask him how long the house had been for sale, how many times he showed it. I didn't know what a failure this house was as far as on the market. So he was anxious to take me through it, and we went up. It was a 7-stair walk-up because the house had been lifted and the basement had been put underneath it later on in years. And he opened the door, the outer door, and immediately to my right was the door that went into the first floor apartment. And this woman came. The door opened very quickly. It startled me. And this gray-haired woman came out. And if you saw a Paranormal Witness, it's redundant, but I tell everybody that the person they used, the actress, was lovable compared to the real Myra. This woman came out, and she had matted gray hair. I mean, she looked like she hadn't bathed or washed in a long, long time, swearing at the top of her lungs, language that I won't even put on the radio for effect, just lambasting us, telling us to get out, we don't want you here. And she was cradling this little poodle on her shoulder, which she never ceased to cradling the whole time she lived there. I couldn't tell if it was white or gray. I mean, the poodle was filthy. And she just started screaming, and the real estate man, started screaming right back. I mean, just using the same language she was using, telling her, get your old ass back in there, pushed her, actually physically pushed her, slammed the door. I was startled because at 24 years old, I was brought up, you respect your elders, number one, and you certainly don't talk to women that way. That our culture is a little different today. People talk to women any way they want today. But in those days, no, you were polite. You gave your seat to a woman, and I thought it was terrible behavior, but he apologized to me, and he said, it's Myra, and that's the only way you're going to control her. And we then went upstairs, and the upstairs it looked like it had been vandalized. I mean, everything was torn up and torn open and on the floor. But when you're 24 years old and you need a roof over your head, and having a new infant, we couldn't rent anywhere. No one in those years, landlords could say, no, we don't want to rent to anybody with kids. If you got kids or pets, we don't want you. So I was desperate. So I pictured what could be. And, I went ahead and I made the deal without Marcia being involved. And in those years, I guess a lot of young women write me, and they get a little bit bent out of shape at that, but in 1970, a woman's signature was no good on a mortgage, nor was it good to count as income. Even if your wife was a substantial earner, they didn't want her on the mortgage papers.
Right.
So,
it's a lot different.
Marcia fell ill that day. She was like a beach ball, pregnant. And she said, no, you just go look at it. If you like it, buy it, if you can buy it. And that's what I did. And it never occurred to me that there was anything there. I was born and bred in the city, inner city. there wasn't a physical feeling that I felt that day that I hadn't felt sometime in my life. Because I had lived in basements, and I had lived in tenements, and I had lived in, so, chills and bringing in the years. The cool room I actually thought was benefit. You didn't have to air condition it. So I was very, paranormally stupid. Marcia was a bit more sensitive when she first looked at it. But she was kind in that she didn't tell me what the hell did you buy, We had a roof over our heads. I was going to fix it up, and she wasn't going to hurt my feelings, and she was going to make the best of it.
When was it that you really started realizing that you were dealing with something out of the ordinary, supernatural or paranormal?
I'll let her tell it. She noticed it almost immediately moving in. It took me a long while to actually admit it to myself. Because I went through the denial, a long time of denial, and then I went through rationalization, where I rationalized everything, and meanwhile, Marcia kind of knew what was going on.
Okay, Marcia, when did you really have an idea that this wasn't just an old building?
Well, the minute, actually, truthfully, the minute I opened the door, I just felt something like it was pushing me back out again. And it was like I really had to struggle to enter that doorway. And the air was so thick and so dark. And many have talked to us about that, where there's a name for it. I've forgotten what it is, where light just doesn't penetrate.
They call it the gray veil.
Yeah, gray veil, that was it. And no matter what you did, no matter how many windows you opened up, no matter how many lights you turned on, light just wasn't there. And it's like the whole place just absorbed it. And, you really got this really creepy feeling like you were entering something that wasn't real. It's, there's such a difference between the outside of the house and the inside. And you walk into that, and, right away I say that I felt like I was walking into someone else's house and uninvited. And that's a weird feeling, because I was raised, my good old Southern grandmothers, manners, manners, manners. I felt like I was coming into someone's house without being asked. And I had to remind myself, this is my house. And, I tried to get busy thinking, okay, I need to do this, clean that, buy these curtains. And I'm a nester by nature, so I was trying to get that sort of thing in my head and stop the creepy feeling that someone was looking at me, someone's, breathing on me. You feel these little creepy feelings that you just didn't know what to do with. We just had nothing back then to go by.
Now, honestly, we're talking 1970, so
yeah.
It's amazing how far away technologically we are from where we were then. But there was nothing to rely on. There were no iPods or iPhones or cell phones. Phones were illegal. You actually had to lease it from the phone company under FCC. Very, very expensive. And I used to call home, and the phone would be off the hook. And this is one thing that these things do, and I've written an article on it. It's on Paranormal Societies, is they get between relationships. They know how to work on you, and it's something investigators typically don't get a chance to experience. Thank God, okay? Mm-hmm. But a ghost don't, Lisa, you're an experienced investigator. You don't go to a place that's maybe occupied and the thing doesn't jump out of the closet and go boo, Right. If it did that, you'd be out of there. You'd say, got my evidence, goodbye.
Right.
Very true.
It started working on Marcia, and the more Marcia told me that these little things were happening, things were moving, the more I said to her, BS. I just didn't want to hear it.
Right.
And when the phone was off the hook and I couldn't, there was no call waiting in those years, I'd get aggravated. I'd come home and I'd be fuming at her. They'd be like, what the hell were you doing on the phone all day? And it's expensive. Right. And I figure we're going to get this gigantic bill. We're not going to be able to pay it. And you're not going to be laughing then. And she's looking at me like I'm insane.
really, he's never obviously taking care of a baby 24/7. You're not on the phone. By the time you're changing diapers and feeding.
You know, and if you saw a paranormal witness when the priest came to bless the house, unlike paranormal witness, we had about 14, 15, 16 people there, my cousins, my family. And when he raised his arm to bless the living room, his holy water dispenser shattered. And I was an altar boy myself, and I knew the utensil, the brass utensil, and I had never seen brass shatter. I don't know that you can shatter it if I would have bounced it off the concrete. But it shattered, and we didn't know why. No one suspected ghosts. It's like a lot of people give me hell. I'll get some emails and they'll say it was unethical for me to get rid of the building without disclosures. Well, there was no disclosures in 1971, number one. But number two, I swear to God, if I would have put a big neon sign on the front of that house and said, "This house is definitely haunted, certified," they would have took the sign down and put me in an institution. You know, there was no such thing. There was just no such thing as a haunted house. And when the priest failed, he ran out of frightened. I mean, he really was frightened. We couldn't get him back, and it led to a series of phone calls and a final meeting, him and I, where he, as a young man with a hot temper, he baited me and, listened to my story, and he forced me to say the G word, we've got ghosts.
Right.
Once I did that, he sort of smirked at me and he said, "You and your wife should seek psychological help." And with that, the expletives came flying out.
Right.
And they ordered me out of the rectory, off the church grounds, never to come back. I didn't want my wife back there.
Thanks, honey.
But from reading the book, my impression is I think he knew exactly what it was, and instead of seeking further help from others higher up in the church, he turned his back.
Yes, exactly. In fact, in retrospect, when I play it all back, the family went home after the christening, and I waited with my friend, my blind friend, the priest. He changed it to his civvies, and he brought his little kit with him, house blessings. And when he approached the house, prior to us even reaching it, I watched his demeanor change. He became a little slightly more serious. Now, in looking back at it now, it's like he probably had been there before.
Right.
And, of course, Myra greeted him the same way she greeted me, which embarrassed the hell out of me.
Right.
I mean, she just looked at him and spit at him and called him names. And I had to start screaming back, which made me more embarrassed. I said, "Father, forgive me." I said, "It's the only way I can control her." But Myra didn't want the priest there. She did not want a priest there.
Even more so than not wanting you there.
No, she didn't. She would come upstairs, and I was from a small town, and I was raised, you didn't lock your doors or your cars or anything else. I'm sitting in the kitchen having morning coffee after the baby kind of went down for a nap, and she would come bursting in the back door and just start screaming at me and telling me that I put a cigarette out in her coffee. And I'm looking at her like, what is she talking about? And she just kept on and saying that I was making the bad noises and blah, blah, blah. I called Ed and said she has to go, like, now.
I mean, what I didn't put together until 41 years later was that I thought Myra was just insane.
Right.
She talked about stuff moving in her apartment and stuff being missing.
Yeah.
But we never knew the story of Dan and Diane White, who in my book I refer to as Dave and Ellen because I couldn't find him. It was only after the book was released that he found me.
Right.
But he came in with a story of torment 41 years later that blew Marcia and I away. There's one in there. So probably Myra was being tormented the same way Dan's wife was being tormented, the same way my sister was being tormented. there was a whole string there that it seemed like any woman that was on that first floor was going to get the worst of it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I used to take the baby out in the backyard and they put her in a wind-up swing. And I like to be outside as much as possible. The Chicago weather, that's, a small amount of time. And the neighbors next door were very elderly. And I come from a place where everybody says hi to everybody. So I was hi and walked over and she started talking. She looked at the house and she said, "Are you the young couple that just bought this house?" And I said, "Yes." And she looked at me and she said, "I'm so sorry." And I looked at her and I said, "Why?" And she just looked down and walked away. But,
That was Walter's wife.
Walter's wife,
and,
yeah. And at that time, I'm, okay, I'm not the only one that sees this stuff going on. Because you really do think you're going crazy. And I started to think I was going crazy. But something told me I wasn't. And I'm glad I listened to that little voice because, if they try to control, that's what they do. And if you allow it, you give them the power, you give them the energy that they're seeking. And I'm stubborn, very stubborn.
Well, and, we weren't like you are today. Today, you guys are so much smarter at the paranormal.
Yeah. Oh, I wish we had.
Eventually, I wound up being so manipulated that, I did find that shed in the basement. I kind of knew Myra was nuts, so I labeled her. She's crazy. Okay, write her off.
Right.
Then I have this shed in the basement, just full. Now, how stupid was I? I buy a place that's been ransacked. It looks like it's been vandalized.
Yeah.
But in the basement is a shed with a padlock on it that nobody touched. So the family, and there were a lot of members of this family that were at the closing, all very hateful. The same family that ransacked the house never touched this one shed.
Yeah.
But me and my naivety, I said, "Oh man, whatever's in there is mine." So my brother and I, who's 10 years younger than I, we broke the lock and popped the door open, and it was just filled with pornography, early pornography, nudist magazines that went back to the beginning of time. Worse than that, I think the straw that broke the camel's back in my mind was on the back wall were just a stack of shoeboxes. I don't know, 6, 7 high across a 4-foot span. And those shoeboxes were filled with baseball card-sized cutouts from newspapers and magazines. They could be photos or they could have been even cartoons where he cut out body parts, female body parts. So
Yeah.
he was seeing pornography and everything. And I immediately labeled him as a sick pervert. And whenever I would get pissed about something wouldn't go well, or I'd get a surprise that maybe this electrical box wasn't working, I'd start yelling at Ben. So Ben, you bastard, why didn't your family fix this? Why didn't they clean this up? And 41 years later, I laughed my butt off because Danny and I, our first floor tenant, finally came together as friends. And he said to me, his first take on me was he thought I was crazy. Because he would look down the stairs from the first floor apartment, and I'd be walking around the basement. I had a hunch over because I'm 6'3", and the basement was 6 foot.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd be hunched over, either washing or sweeping or doing something. And he said I'd be babbling about something about Ben. And that's all he'd see. So he said sometimes he'd look down and he was kind of afraid to even talk to me because I'm talking emotionally to this thing that isn't there. And so I went from a non-believer to being just totally controlled. I was angry all the time, emotionally. I couldn't protect Marcia. I felt that I was, inadequate as a man, as a husband, which is a hell of a terrible feeling. I knew I had to go to work, and she had to stay there. And, at least for 3 months, we had this crazy old lady downstairs. So she had to tolerate Myra and put up with everything. And it drove me into, within 8 months, it drove me into a pit of despair. For sure. I got to where I would sit by myself and nearly cry. It'd be like, what the hell am I going to do? I have no money. My wife's unhappy. We can't sleep. I mean,
Your wife was frightened.
One of the things you investigators don't experience if you stay in one of these places, you wind up being alert. Your alert system goes on. Your adrenaline starts flowing.
Yes.
Try to go to sleep. Try to go to sleep. And then imagine if you do go to sleep, you're exhausted, and you have terrible dreams. I mean, so you're suffering in sleep deprivation. You're walking around on eggshells all the time.
Yeah.
And then non-paranormal things start to become paranormal. So if Marcia moved my attaché case, I'd say, why did you move my attaché case? And I started blaming her for things and looking for things that might not be paranormal.
I always explain it like this. When I first went to that house, it was get out, we don't want you here. By the time we had gone through the exorcism and gone through everything, by the time we actually left, it was complete opposite. It was, you're not going anywhere. So
what wanted you there?
Exactly.
Yeah, it was kind of amazing because if Marcia and I went out for the evening, it was experienced by the Whites who were on the first floor, and then later my sister and my mother. If Marcia and I went out, all hell would break loose in our upstairs apartment. So they would hear crashing and thrashing and furniture banging. I'd come home, they'd greet me in the backyard, and they'd say, you may have somebody upstairs. I'd go up there carefully, nothing's out of place, nothing's wrong. But it was like they would throw a fit if we left later on.
Ed and Marcia, I've got a question, and I think it's kind of timely with some of the things that are kind of going on in the paranormal field. And from your perspective, having gone through this, and especially since your experiences were with human spirits, and there's such an emphasis on labeling things inhuman or demonic. Can you speak to the fact that the source of the spirit isn't necessarily what's going to determine how negative it is?
Yeah, I mean, in one case we knew it was a spirit, and the psychic actually believed he put her to rest, which we do believe. She was an old woman that Marcia and I physically saw, and there was nothing frightening about her. It was the only solid apparition I've ever seen in my life. There was nothing frightening about it. If I had a picture of it and showed it to you, you'd say, "Oh, that's a nice picture of an old woman." It would be refuted immediately because people expect ghosts to appear a certain way. We had something there that was not a person.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I don't know what you would call it. The exorcist called it a demonic entity. It was definitely dark, and it was on the first floor, and it would live between the first floor and the basement. That was its domain, and I could feel it when I was in the basement.
Yeah.
Everything else, I've had people do Ancestry.com, and they write to me, and they want to know the history, and I think all that stuff's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But there's one thing I do know, and I know this from that experience and from a number of other succeeding experiences that I've had. Ghosts lie. So they will lie to you. And it's much like the internet. If as an investigator you go out and you believe that a little girl died in this place and her name is Sally, and you grab your EVP machines and you say, can I speak to Sally? Whatever's on the other side is going to, if it wants to mess with you, is going to say, okay, I'm Sally. What do you want? And they're gonna mess with you. And I don't trust any of it, actually. And if the more malevolent or demonic it may be, there's a huge difference there. So malevolent is one thing, and I think that's caused by, at least in our experience, it was caused by us violating their domain.
Right.
If you, as an investigator, go into a place and you've got a malevolent spirit, it may or may not react to you immediately, simply because it doesn't know that whether you're gonna violate its domain and set up camp there. Let's say, once you set up house, it's like, oh no, now you're in my space. Now I'm gonna start doing stuff. something demonic will just pitch something at you right away. If you run into people and they say, "What's the difference between malevolence and demonic?" If they don't use the word force or power, it's like a propelled object. We saw propelled objects. Now, when a ghost propels an object or a spirit, it sort of defies physics because it'll start out real fast. And in fact, some of the investigators on TV I've seen have captured it. Mm-hmm. If it's throwing, let's say, a bottle or a brick or something like that, or like we used to throw her mixer from the wall, it would come off the wall. In that first instant, you would think that thing's going to fly across the room. But the energy would dissipate with 2-3 feet.
Right.
It would just dissipate to nothing. Today, I would know that if I saw that type of thing, I would know that's a spirit. If the thing came at me and came across the room and hit me, I would know that's a damn demon. Immediately. They don't want for energy. They've got it all.
Right. For those that haven't read the book, when you were talking about Ben, some of the real negative things that were happening there were from the human spirits as well.
Right.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It was all of them. Sure.
Yeah, initially my take was, and again I was young and naive, I believed a family had built that building. They all lived there. In fact, Myra was a spinster that lived her whole life in that building.
Right, she was born
and the brothers lived in there. Her brothers lived in that building.
Right.
And unlike today, you and I, all of us, have a different sense of domain. I mean, I had a heart attack last year. I got a pacemaker put in. Doctor said to me, move close to a trauma center. So we lifted up our stuff and went to Springfield. In the 1800s, late 1800s, people bought property that they expected their generations to live in.
Right. It'd be a family home.
They held funerals in the front room. That was a domain that they didn't expect to ever leave or ever to have a non-family member live in. And there's plenty of these situations in Chicago. It's like, I think a lot of these older cities like Philly and the older part of New York, it's probably hard to find a building that isn't occupied.
Now, we did find a beautiful old home. It's very tempting.
Yeah, in our search for this house, we found a house that was, it's Art Deco, was built in 1932, right across the street from Mercy Hospital. Second house in the corner on the west.
I know the house. I've seen it a million times.
Marcia and I walked in there. It was a great price. We walked in. She went up. I went down. We quickly met back in the middle and said, "Let's get the hell out of here. It's occupied." I mean, it was occupied. You could now, whether it's my senses or my experience of recognizing it, I knew immediately. And although I wanted that house, and if I had another heart attack, she could just put me in a wheelchair and cruise me across the street, so it was perfect. But I'm not living with any ghosts. I mean, as you know, Lisa, I don't go to Paracons. I went to one for net. I've never done a book signing. I don't go to any place near paranormal. No ghost hunting. I turned down all invitations. I been there, did that, and too many people take it so lightly, and they bring something home. It starts to affect their life, and they don't even realize it.
Yeah, we've seen that several times on people that we just, we try to help. It so, makes us. I feel really blessed that we get so many emails with people in the same sort of condition we were in, and it's like, please tell me I'm not crazy. That's really what they're looking for.
Validation.
That they're not losing their minds. And just being able to get that clear, we've gotten a list going where we sort of tell people, try and see if this could help you. Don't try to do it alone. That's the worst thing you can do, because you're too emotional, for one thing. I'm not even sure a ghost hunter could do their own house successfully, because there's too much emotion involved, and it's also
typically people.
Well, there's a fight for domain. It's mine, no, it's mine, no, it's mine.
Most people don't want public exposure. I mean, I've had 2 or 3 television companies call me, and they read the book, and then they tell me that they think I'm a fair judge of what would be really paranormal and what isn't. Okay, because I have heard people say that they're, some of the ghosts are invisible Sasquatch that we can't see. There are those out there. There are nutcases out there. So, but what I tell the TV production companies is, if you have a real haunting where the people are really, where it's active and the people are affected, it's going to be 1 out of 1,000 that's going to talk to you.
Yeah.
They all keep it. None of them want to go public. I mean, even on Paranormal Witness, I did not want to do it. I planted my feet. They had to move their production company to St. Louis. My daughter had to drive me there. My grandkids had to threaten me with disownment. They said, "Papa, you got to be on Sci-Fi." I didn't want to talk about it. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
What would you recommend for when you say you're contacted by people who are in a similar situation that you were, and what advice would you give them this many years after what you went through and what you know now of what they should do to get help?
There's lots of things. I mean, as you well know, I'm preaching to the choir here. Spirits, benign spirits, are common.
Mm-hmm.
And so most cases, Marcia and I will talk to the person or contact them or whatever, and if the occurrence, I call them occurrences, isn't frightening, and it seems like cabinet doors opening and footsteps in the hall, knockings, there's certain things that are just, they're common worldwide, from the Philippines to Australia.
Sure.
If they're not frightened, I tell them, bring some blessed items into your house, ignore it, do not address it, and let it be. If we can't handle it, if it goes beyond something that Marcia and I think we can consult, then we turn it over to either a good investigation team, or there's a website, incredible website called Paranormal Societies, Inc., run by William Wilkins. You can actually go there and get an investigation team in Peru if you want one.
Sure.
Right.
So we'll send people there. And since you brought it up, I mean, that's what spawned. Everybody said to me, "What the hell did you do Renegos for?" I want to hunt Renegos. Everybody's borrowing it and playing it all over the internet. The actual reason I did that was because I have a pile of emails, probably a half a foot high, where people, basically the gist of it is, "We love your book, blah, blah, blah." But then it's how do I get involved in the paranormal? And my answer is always the same. It's do not open that door. But there are so many people that want to be involved.
Well, good for them. I'm glad there are.
One day I just had a good sense of humor and I recorded Renegos. You want to be involved in the paranormal? Rent a ghost.
I tell you what, why don't we take this opportunity to play it for the listeners, and then they'll understand what you're talking about.
Are you sitting out there lonely and feeling left out? Do you want to be included in the world of the paranormal, but really don't know how? We have the paranormal solution for you. Call us at 1-800-RENT-A-GHOST. We can deliver everything from a timid spirit that walks the halls, or one that simply opens a cabinet door. Or you can get a feisty poltergeist that can trash your house and really liven things up. We can get you as many shadow people as you need to have a party. Do you have too many unwanted friends or family just barging in? Our screaming and wailing banshee will guarantee that after hearing some deafening anguish, they will never return. Impress your friends or take revenge with a specter of death hovering over your dinner table or theirs. Or if you're lonely, you might like a simple attachment that follows you everywhere. EVPs? Choose from our line of celebrity voices. What investigator would not want to hear Jim Morrison or Whitney Houston? Or maybe Michael Jackson or Kurt Cobain? Order now and get 3 free orbs. We are 1-800-RENT-A-GHOST. Not responsible for damage caused by poltergeist activity, divorce, loss of job, sleep deprivation, bedwetting, uncontrolled vomiting, suicide, or the possibility of being hospitalized for insanity. And most important, there will be no returns. This is author Edwin F. Becker. You might also like to try our 1-800-OWN-A-ZOMBIE. Are you sitting out there?
Well, Ed, I think that goes to show with Rent-A-Ghost a couple of things. I think that there are a lot of people who want to get involved, maybe for an adrenaline rush or just some sort of excitement. And while exposure is good for the field, I think it helps people that are experiencing problems to know that they aren't crazy and there are places to go. It has its downside too, and that's just it. Have you seen situations where that mentality has made it worse?
Marcia and I have seen situations where good people have been harmed, they brought things home, they've gotten sick.
We watched them change before our eyes.
You know, what you guys do when you're out investigating, if you're dealing with the human factor, where people are being bothered, I don't think you'll ever realize the service you're performing, because people just want to know they're not going nuts.
Yeah, people say to us occasionally.
But you're doing it at your own great risk.
Right,
I'm sorry.
Occasionally they'll say, I read your book, we don't know him. It's just some stranger. And they'll say, we read the book, it's not that scary. And my answer to them is, you live it. You live it 24/7, knowing there's stuff there that's out to hurt you. It never stops. Yes, by itself, a door opening and closing is not scary. But when you know stuff is going to happen all the time, what's next? What's next? It wears you down, and you don't sleep. You don't eat right. You are in fear constantly. Plus, I had a baby to protect. And then later on, I had my nephews to protect. Any child in the house, I felt I had to go and protect them. And it just, they don't seem to understand. A one-time thing of seeing things that we talk about probably wouldn't frighten you out of your shoes. But trying to live it for 2 years, and it wears you down. They completely destroy your self-confidence.
Yeah, well, that's why when I read a book, and again, I won't mention any names, but people have experienced these horrendous hauntings for 10 years, right? We've lived there, and they still live in the building, all right, 10 years later. Let me tell you something. We lived there 21 months, 18 days, and 12 hours. Right down to the minute, all right? I'm not a weak-minded person, but I would have been driven completely insane by the time we hit year 3.
Definitely.
I would have been a whole different personality, so when I read about someone who's had a horrendous haunting and they're still there and they're shaking hands with their ghosts,
at least
I don't go there.
No, you don't. And I have to tell you is that it took years to get over the fear that they're going to find me. They're going to find me. They're going to keep hurting me. They're going to find me. It took years for me to get rid of that. And just really because I felt like, okay, if they're going to get me, they would have done it by now. So I must be safe. But those doubts, they teach you to doubt. And they could go anywhere, be anywhere, and I can't.
Yeah, we got slammed. I mean, we at a time when there wasn't very much resource, we did have an exorcist and a well-known psychic.
Yeah.
And they came in and they were going to save the day. There was no doubt in their mind that they were going to remove and cleanse our building. And they failed miserably. And once they failed miserably, I mean, our back was broken. Our emotional back was broken.
Can you describe a little bit about the exorcism that was done, that was televised? Because I mean, to be honest, it's one of the best descriptions of really a true haunting that I've read. I mean, it just comes through so honest. What were you thinking as that was happening?
I was fearful because they warned in advance. We had to tell everybody to get out of the building. At least the Exorcist did, and it was a point of that I kind of enjoyed because these NBC executives came in and they were all laughing like this was a carnival atmosphere. They accompanied Carol Simpson, but when the Exorcist came in, he looked at them all. He set up his altar. He looked at them and he said in a very, very commanding voice, he said, "Whoever is in this room when I seal this house stays until the end of the proceedings." Well, all the executives ran out. I mean, they immediately just ran out.
Yeah.
And then we went into this 3.5 hour, I refer to it as like a ping pong match because an exorcist and a psychic don't work well together. I don't know if you'll ever see a piece of footage where an exorcist and a psychic are working well together. Simply because the exorcist builds up a concrete mind. He's going to face whatever's there with prayer and sanctity. There's going to be no exchange in conversation. He don't give a crap where they came from, what their problem is. He wants them gone. The psychic now is a little more like a general practitioner. He wants to know who you are. Let's find out a little bit about you. He's gonna massage this spirit and hopefully guide him to the light. Nothing wrong with either philosophy, but the two of them go together like oil and water.
Well, they're battling each other.
And that's what happened during that exorcism. Now I can look back, and Marcia and I listened to it. I've got the whole 3.5 hours on a sound
It's still
tape.
hard.
And every time Joseph reached a point where he would start to communicate, you could hear his breathing. The exorcist would just yell at him, "Come back, Joseph, come back," and break his concentration. Because he was afraid that there was going to be a possession now. And on camera, I guess he figured that would be pretty ugly. We didn't know what would happen.
Yeah, that wouldn't have been too good, no.
God, I mean, there is a shot of me in that video where you see my eyes are as big as $10. They really were. I had no idea what was going to happen.
Well, I think the people that watched it, what little was there was so much more to that. And the poor sound man, I mean, he was right next to him sitting on the floor. Everybody had crosses and you name it. They were holding on for dear life because sound man heard things the rest of us couldn't hear. And his eyes got so big several times, I thought he was going to leave. He was and all of a sudden, all the batteries stopped working. Mm-hmm. So they had to go down to the truck and and put new batteries. It happened, honey, I don't know how many times they would look at each other and just go, "Help, what's going on here?" Because I'm hearing knocking, I'm hearing voices. What was the one
the birds were probably the most predominant. This sheeping started, and then it just expanded, and then exploded. And 2, 3 in the afternoon on a Chicago street, you've got very few trees.
Yeah.
You got this tree with 1,000, 2,000 birds, and it's screaming.
In October.
Now he didn't have the equipment you have today, where he had a equalizer or something. And they tried to filter it out, even in NBC studio, and you can hear it on that YouTube video. You can still hear it. They were never able to filter out those birds.
What was the voice?
And we couldn't figure it out because it wasn't like a Stephen King movie where they were all ravens or something like that.
Oh, no,
These were just a crap load of birds of all species just screaming, and it made no sense whatsoever.
Yeah. No, there was the one voice though. The sound man did actually too.
Yeah, no, there was a voice on there. When we played the sound tape back, and I got it on DVD now, and we only did this a couple of years ago. We heard some knockings and some sounds that were so sharp and crisp that we knew we never heard them on there. But toward the end, now we're on the second floor, blocks from a school, half mile from any school, windows shut, house is sealed, everything's quiet. On this tape, you hear a child's voice in the distance say, "Mama." Just very clear, "Mama." And creeped us out when we first heard it. Whether the sound man heard that or not, I don't know.
I don't know what he was hearing, but he couldn't leave fast
Yeah, he
enough.
couldn't leave fast enough. He ran out of that place.
I'm sure.
I'm telling you, there was so much more to it that was on that was on that tape. So much tape had been destroyed or
Well,
gone.
that was the one tragedy was in dealing with Paranormal Witness. They're owned by NBC, and they wanted the clippings for the end of the episode, which I think you've seen maybe. So I pointed them towards Chicago, and I knew that they had shot actually 16 hours worth of film
Right.
over 2 days. So I asked them, I said, if you get the film, can I have a copy of the 16 hours? No problem, Ed, we'll get you whatever we can get. They wound up calling me 3 weeks before the episode aired, and they said, Ed, can we have your copy? And I said, why? And he said, they lost it all. There is no footage in the archives.
Gone.
All gone. Well, Dan White, our previous tenant, has
That's
a
right,
friend in,
yeah.
he's got friends that are in security and in dark places. He's in security. So he had one of his friends investigate, and it's gone. 16 hours of footage, gone.
It's just very strange.
So,
And-
yeah, we never did get any more.
Yeah, you know, back in those days, news was half an hour. They had to do everything, weather, sports, you know. And ours was 6 minutes.
Over 6 minutes.
Yeah.
But more important, they used it for a program that was rivaling 60 Minutes called First Tuesday. CBS came out with 60 Minutes, and NBC countered with First Tuesday. So they made a segment for First Tuesday that wouldn't show in Illinois because it had played so much there.
And we tried to find it.
That segment was lost also, so we couldn't get. It would have been probably a 12-minute segment, twice as long.
I see. Well, Ed, I hate to say this, we have to wind things up real quick. Running out of time. It's been a wonderful hour. Enjoyed it.
Thank you.
And I definitely want you guys back again. And is there anything that you'd like to plug that you guys are up to or future projects?
No, my book, of course, True Haunting, and it's either at www.edwinbecker.com or it's got its own website, which my daughter created, called www.truehaunting.com. And look up my name on Amazon, and there's a bunch of books, and buy them and read them, and you'll feel better.
Sure, now, Wednesday nights, if you have time, come see.
I produce my wife's radio program, Paranormal Angels.
Yes,
That's on blog on Tuesdays.
I suggest everyone check out Marcia's program and check out Ed's books, and he's got other books besides True Haunting. We really appreciate it. Check Paranormal Science Lab out at paranormalsciencelab.com and on Facebook, and stay tuned for Closer to Death with Selena Rome. Thank you all.
Good night. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Lisa.
Thank you.